Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm perinatal psychologist and host Dr. Kat. There is more to the story than just postpartum depression, and this podcast aims to share it all, from personal stories and lived experience to experts who break down the ups and downs of life, from getting pregnant, pregnancy, perinatal loss, and postpartum adjustment to new parenthood. While this is not psychotherapy or medical advice, it is all of the stuff you ever wanted to know about mental health and new parenthood. Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm your host and perinatal mental health certified psychologist, Dr. Kat Kayani. On our episode today, we are talking about parental burnout. Our guest, Shelley Kemmerer, is the founder of Run Tell Mom. She is a licensed physician assistant and certified in parental burnout prevention. She helps parents and caregivers with live-in children navigate transitions through their parenting journey. She offers personalized, customizable resources, collaborative workshops, and masterclasses with the goal to optimize the parenting experience while filling the space beyond clinical care. Shelley's going to share with us her perspective on parental burnout in the United States and how to support new parents to prevent burnout. So let's meet Shelley. Welcome, Shelley. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited for you to talk about the things that you're passionate about, parental burnout, and a bunch of the other work that you do. I know you have a really big presence on social media and you're helping a lot of people that way. So yeah, if you can give us some more details about what you do and what your passion is and what you're going to talk to us about today.
Sure. So my name is Shelley. I'm the founder of Run Tell Mom. I'm a parental resource consultant and also a workshop facilitator. And I'm a licensed physician assistant and I'm certified in parental burnout. I got that training as of this year at the Training Institute for Parental Burnout. So I work from a preventative resource-based standpoint. So people always ask me, like, what does a parental wellness consulting company do? Well, it's kind of I guess it's a new thing. It's something that I've created based on what has kind of occurred through the pandemic. We prioritize parental well-being. So we examine the modifiable and not modifiable factors within the home and the professional ecosystem. So I'm kind of like a research and gather practical resource person. So I look into things for the family based on what the family needs. And I listen to their particular family situation, what they're searching for. And based on that, I curate a resource plan for them to utilize throughout their parenting journey.
Oh, that sounds awesome and extremely useful. How did you come to understand that this kind of resource was needed?
So for me, after I had, who's now my 4-year-old son, after I had him, I kind of noticed this shift in between having a newborn baby to everything else that happens thereafter, all the changes that occur, physically, emotionally, the needs within the house, how your relationship to your partner changes. And through that, and being, a licensed provider and a patient, I kind of fell between the line of how can we optimize things so that we can provide these resources. And also, what does the patient need, or what are some of the questions that are being asked that might not necessarily fall into the lap of, an obstetrician or a pediatrician. And so I created this business based on some of those questions that we didn't know, who should be answering these things.
That's interesting because you have a very specific perspective too, being a physician's assistant, kind of knowing how things work on the medical side, and then the experience of being a parent to a new little, what it feels like to be on the kind of patient side. I imagine that gave you a real depth of like being able to see what is missing.
Yeah, I felt like, the birth of my son, I remember this moment of packing him up and putting him in the car after being in the hospital for a few days and sitting in the car and looking at him and thinking, what do I do now? It was just like this sobering moment of sitting in the car and thinking, okay, well, now I take him home, but what are all the next steps? And I guess having that kind of weighted kind of conversation with myself and, how can I be the best parent to my child? What kind of environment do I want to cut out and carve out for my child? What are some of the things that I need to be teaching him throughout all the stages of his life? And there was just so many questions that I kind of had that I felt like having a clinical degree didn't really address these things. They address all the physiological changes, which is fascinating and wonderful. But then there's all the other stuff that we really don't talk about. But now it seems like we're starting to see more and more on social media, which is great that people are sharing.
Oh, sure. Of the kind of on the ground realities of parenting.
Yeah. How the expectation versus reality, they're totally two different feelings and two different sentiments. Sometimes parents feel very lonely, even in a world where there are tons of parents. You feel very lonely and isolated, making sure that you're doing the right thing. There's a lot of societal pressure to make sure that you're that specific type of parent. And so in thinking about all of that, I started thinking, well, how do we build a community based on this need, and how can we collaborate with other individuals to strengthen the information behind this stuff and sharing stories and sharing resources, things that are research based. And so for the platform, at least for the social media platform, that was really a goal, to build that up and have collaborative discussions with other like-minded individuals, other providers, other, supportive specialists in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Both from like the medical side and other sides as well.
Yes, I really thought that was of utmost importance because, as I speak to parents and I kind of explore, like, what are some of the things that you would want to ask people that you're not entirely sure that you should be asking? And a lot of it is finding connection, for finding these support circles, wondering if they should be feeling the way that they're feeling, finding, a therapist, talking about what reproductive psychiatry is. I mean, all of these things. And I don't even need to provide the medical advice because I provide the resource, but it's questions like that people have. They don't know whether or not they should be asking, like a midwife or a doula or a pediatrician. And so a lot of these discussions end up becoming between parent and provider.
I'm curious, from your professional perspective, while you were going through your own personal experience, were there things that were like glaring to you or very clear to you that, well, I guess that maybe you needed help with, and then you found out that other people needed help with? Do you know what I'm asking? Like, how your personal experience affected this?
So from a provider's perspective and personal, I just noticed that each visit was very short. And that's not at the fault of, for me, I saw an OB, a shared practice. And so for the most part, I saw one OB, and sometimes occasionally I would see another. But the visits on average were anywhere from like 7 to 10 minutes. And there's a lot of things that you address during these visits, right? I mean, all the physiological changes, making sure that you're physically healthy, but it's all the discussion around how are you mentally doing with all the changes that are occurring? What is occurring with your partner? Does your partner have any questions? So that was one of the first things that I noticed, is there's just not enough time to talk about the other important things that are occurring during the transformational period of your life. And then the other one personally was returning back to work after having a newborn and going into the medical field and working at the rate that clinicians work at is so taxing and can be so exhausting. And there's a lot of emotional exhaustion that exists working in the healthcare field. I mean, you're working, long hours, you're dealing with a lot of challenging diagnoses. There's so many things to take into consideration. And during that period of time, I remember trying to pump, and I was just so stressed thinking about, I need to have X amount of milk for my baby, and my supply plummeted during that time. And it was heartbreaking to me. Like I really felt that deeply. I felt like a failure, really, not being able to supply while working.
Thank you for bringing that in. I appreciate you saying that. It makes me think of, I specifically in my practice, just happen to meet with a lot of nurses and also teachers who work long hours too, but specifically nurses and some medical providers that have described what you're describing, that it's like nearly impossible even though there are quote unquote laws in place or whatever for you to take pump breaks and whatnot, but the
Mm-hmm.
dynamics of the work environment are so fast and quick paced, and you don't always have someone to cover you, and all this other stuff that in and of itself has to lead to burnout, that you just can't do what you need to do even at your job.
Yeah. And even with the laws that are in place, there's
Mm-hmm.
this very distinct pressure that exists so for instance, if I have X amount of time that I am expected to pump, and depending upon where I'm needing to take that time,
Mm-hmm.
I would go into an X-ray room,
Mm-hmm.
because there wasn't a specific spot within the facility that I was working at that I should be
Uh-huh.
pumping, or I was in somebody's office. And
Right.
so you have people constantly knocking
Mm-hmm.
or needing
Mm-hmm.
to use the room.
Right.
And so this idea that, hey, somebody could just barge in on me
Mm-hmm.
on something that I need at least for me, I needed a peaceful environment, or wanted at least a peaceful environment for 15 minutes to be able to pump.
Right.
So that became very difficult. And then on top of it, going to see patients after that period of time where you're, storing your milk and putting your pumps
Mm-hmm.
away and trying to clean everything up, you're doing that pretty frequently. I was trying to pump pretty regularly at that time. It was like every hour and a half or something. And so it had an impact on me, because I remember
Mm-hmm.
thinking, is it always going to be this way where I have to make a decision based on what
Oh
I
yeah.
need to do
Mm-hmm.
for my little one versus what I have to do for my profession?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is tough. I mean, I think as you're thinking about it, I'm like, this is a huge part of why parents, difficulty with the transition. There's just not adequate time.
Mm-hmm.
For one, off of work, but also just if you are going back to work, adequate time to do what you need to take care of everything.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
huge problem.
when I would come home, I remember it was during a pretty bad influenza season. I'd come home and, wash my hands, wash my clothes, and just be thinking to myself, like, oh, I want to make sure that everything's clean and I have the milk that I
Yeah.
need for my child. I'm like juggling all of these things, and then still coming down from a busy day. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's just a lot, I think, we put on the backs of parents to balance having the career, being able to teach from home if you're homeschooling kids, or if
Right.
they're, learning virtually right now. There's just a lot of expectation. And I think now this is why, we're starting to see burnout in exponential numbers. It's much more difficult now over the past 18 months, as we've seen 19 months now,
Sure. Yeah.
than it was in the past. But the curtain has been pulled back now, and we can't unsee what we're
Right.
seeing now.
Yeah, your point, what do you think are the things that are leading to parental burnout, including what you've just mentioned? And why is it such a problem, outside of, including the pandemic, obviously, but specifically, what are you seeing?
So it's layered like an onion. And I know on our platform, we shared that parenting is like an onion. There's layers to it. Well, this is very similar. So there was this article that I read in Parents recently, and the headline was, "New study shows that parental burnout is worse in the United States than most other countries." So of course, you see that, and for me, I saw that and I read it. And this was a pre-pandemic study that surveyed roughly, I think it was like 17,000 parents from 42 different countries. And they found that United States was roughly at 7.9%. And they pinpointed a few things that I thought were really interesting with respect to why the United States falls into this category. So there's this identification that individualistic cultures tended to experience high burnout prevalence in comparison to collectivism.
Yeah.
So looking at the individual versus the collective. So they're seeing higher burnout prevalence in individualistic cultures. The other thing that was mentioned is perfectionism in parenting and competing against other parents to have everything in order. So, that's the clean house, the busy social life, the, excelling academically, and this like quote unquote Pinterest perfect parent. And all these kind of expectations, they take a toll on parents. And I think it's, every time you open social media, there's this idea, this curated idea of what the perfect parent should look like. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on parents in this country in particular.
For sure. Absolutely. I don't know what the science is or anything like that on like pre-social media and now in this way, but I see it all the time as well. Just this pressure and comparison trap that people get into about how, what they think they should be doing here, and coupled with the fact that we don't have the time, meaning like a lot of pay time off, parental leave, plus also to your point, all this individualism that people aren't getting the help that they need because either they feel like they have to do it on their own or everyone expects them to do it on their own.
Yes. This whole societal expectation is so high for parents, but the support provided to parents is not commensurate. So we're expected to balance this stacked plate with to-dos, hitting productivity goals at work, involving our children in extracurricular activities, keeping a clean home, like I mentioned, and also practicing self-care, which is a very popular topic right now on social media, is self-care. I have heard from parents that they feel like, the discussion of self-care can be difficult because it's not like parents don't want the self-care. They do want the self-care, but they need the time and resources to be able to perform self-care in a way that is actually nurturing to them. So sometimes that looks like, taking time off of social media or, beyond just the bubble bath, like actually going and maybe having like a checkup that they've put off for X amount of time, or, spending time outside and not being bothered by, different things to do within the household. There's all these different ways that we can perform the self-care, but it's having the time and the resource to actually do it and invest in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that point. The discrepancy between the pressure to do all of this and then the actual resources. I hope that's something that people really hear. But because I see that, within therapy sessions, that feeling is like very internalized. Like I should be able to do X, Y, or Z. But the reality is that how could you? Because you don't have the time or energy or support to do those things. Yeah. Yeah. That is all over the place in new parenthood. Just trying to balance all those stacked plates, as you said.
Yeah. And with parents, depending upon the age of the child, some things might be more taxing than others. So for instance, if you have, kids who are younger, I remember in the beginning of everything, roughly, 17, 16 months ago, I had a 2-year-old. And my 2-year-old is now a 4-year-old. And obviously there's a lot of change that occurs between those two periods of time.
Right.
And it is, for me, I felt like it was physically very busy, but we also have an 11-year-old. And so I felt like the difference in between the two personally was the physical component and the emotional component of having to explain to our kids, let's say they're not going back to school or there's, this wave of closures, you hold the grief of your children too. And so the layers to it are, it's physically and emotionally demanding to be a parent, but on top of that, we're having to constantly answer to our children. And sometimes we don't have the answers. And so, being able to do all this and perform what we were talking about, like perform the self-care, can be difficult because we're also managing having difficult discussions on a regular basis during a time of change.
Yeah. Including with your partner, if there's a partner involved, and navigating all that. I think I've seen some articles on the stereotypical gender roles taking place these days because of COVID, like a lot of women having to stop working and a lot of male partners needing to be out of the house or out of the house more. And that creates its own tension as well. I mean, being COVID specific. So
yes,
yeah, there's a lot of upheaval within the whole family system.
Yeah. But who ends up taking care of the children? Who ends up doing the homework with the kids? Who, balances things that go on within the household, cleaning out the refrigerator, the lint trap. I mean, there's all these
Right.
things. And we've been addressing it actually recently with this collaboration I did with Scientific Mommy on invisible labor. And this discussion now it's very topical because we're seeing, not only are mothers leaving the workforce and having to take care of kids. And I'm not painting this with a broad brush. Just basing this off of, articles I've been reading recently. But what happens when, this amount of work falls onto one person? So how can we work collaboratively to make that change, to take the invisible labor and make it visible so we can start redividing things or redistributing things to make it more equitable within the home. And I think that's such an important discussion to have now, because we are seeing that parents are just, there's a lot of parents who are truly exhausted and need to recalibrate a little bit. And that's an important conversation to be having if you are a dual parent household.
Oh, right. For sure. Right. There's all kinds of other arrangements in terms of being a solo parent or having another parent outside of the home that you're having to arrange things with, and different schedules and different demands, or being a solo parent and needing to rely on family. It gets really, really complex. But kind of turning back right now to what you were saying. So what are you seeing in terms of relationships within the home and things that people are needing in postpartum, specifically around parenting or parental burnout?
So since I work specifically from a resource standpoint and a prevention-based standpoint, the most important thing to me is the division of labor amongst, if there are two parents within the house or there's a supportive ecosystem that one can rely on, is assembling something early on so we can prevent problems down the line. And so what that would look like is, writing everything down and taking inventory of what you actually do, what you do within the home and also within your professional atmosphere. So for some parents, maybe they're considering a return to work, but it's not going to be right away, or they're looking at, a gradual restart to going back to work. And so there's a lot of customization that goes into that. And it's really, I guess it's imperative that you set something up so that both parties involved can get sleep, can, exercise, or, get their nutrient dense meal in, able to do, those self-care things that we were talking about before, and invest in the things that you previously enjoyed, like whether that's gardening. For me, gardening was a big thing and something that I introduced to my youngest over the past 18 months. But it's deciding how you want to redistribute things around the house to make it more equitable. And then aside from that, understanding physiologically how much has changed from, development of baby onto the postpartum period. And then, things to look out for, which is, things that we see on social media a lot. People are talking about more postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, signs and symptoms, things of that nature, and securing a therapist or a support circle. Why, Postpartum Support International is so awesome with this. But being able to connect with somebody so you don't feel alone. Those are some of the most important things that I kind of push within my business, is to, one, work collaboratively, and two, make sure your needs are being met by the resources that you acquire. So it's not just about quantity, it's the quality of it.
If you could also come back to that sleep part, that's absolutely something we talk a lot about here, because it is that important. And the navigating that, it can be tricky. It can be really tricky, and it takes quite a bit of trial and error. I guess. Is that what you're seeing as well? And what you're, how are you supporting people through that?
There was a conversation I had yesterday with a group of parents. We met up with a bunch of daycare parents, and everybody was talking about, their kids' sleep schedules, and some have new babies and some, toddlers and that sort of thing. Everyone had a different answer. Everyone, had a different, my kid started sleeping through the night at X point. My kid started sleeping through the night at 2 years. My kid still doesn't sleep through the night. And so I think the important thing to know is that everyone's sleep schedule is going to look differently. And also parents, not every parent has the same work schedule. Some have older siblings and you also have to work with that sleep schedule. And so it's to be flexible and also understand that your sleep training, if you decide to do it or however you organize it, is not going to be the same as your neighbor. It's not going to be the same as your parent or your cousin or your aunt or your best friend. It's going to look different. And so I think one of the most important things is, nap when possible. Of course, people say sleep when the baby sleeps, but that's not always an option. There are other things going on. And it's almost presumptive to say just nap, when the baby naps, because you really don't know what that schedule looks like. And also, develop a collaborative sleep schedule with your partner if you do have a dual parent household or dual support system within your household, so that each individual can get some kind of sleep and chunks of sleep, whether that's like 4+ hours, et cetera, especially early on. The study that I looked at recently said mothers who slept less than 7 hours have shorter telomeres in their white blood cells. So that plays a role in protecting from degradation and information preservation of our genome. And this is a very dorky thing that I mention it because it's not just important to get the sleep, but it impacts our immune system if we don't. And so if we look at it from that perspective, we put some more importance on it and say, this isn't just to get the sleep, it's so our overall body functions optimally. We need to figure out a way to obtain good sleep optimization.
For sure, which is also important for recovery and repair and all of that, especially if there was a difficult birth and
of course.
But any kind of birth. I mean, that's a lot for your body to go through. So certainly.
I was just going to say, if you do have family support, like local family support, some people have local family support and they have people who will come over and help with the baby, put that support system to work. They're not there to just visit and hang out. It's time for you to sleep. I mean, really put them to work, because this is about having the true support to be able to reinvest in yourself and, recover, like you were saying, from, let's say there was a difficult labor, or you're just adjusting to baby sleep schedule. Maybe you're pumping very frequently, have that supportive ecosystem in place so that you can get those periods of rest. It's not just for your baby's benefit, it's for your own overall health to be able to make sure that you're getting that sleep in.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sleep is so key. Have you checked out the pregnancy workbook yet? If you or somebody you know is entering into a new pregnancy and possibly feeling some jitters or anxiety or worry, this book is perfect for you or them. With loads of insights and information on how to cope through pregnancy and anxiety, there's also quite a few tips and tricks and skills for you to use in your day-to-day. Pick up a copy today for yourself or someone you love to help ease the pregnancy journey. The pregnancy workbook can be found anywhere books are sold online, and any review that you can leave for the book is helpful so that other people can know if it's the right book for them. What are your top several things that you talk to parents about, or resources that you give out for burnout in general for parents? Either it can be new or expecting or at any point during the game.
Sure. So one of them that I mentioned earlier is Postpartum Support International. I find that is a great resource. There's so many different online support groups. There's a PSI hotline. You can connect with local resources. I think that's one to put in the bank to save for sure. 2 is the phone number 211, which is a confidential line, and that provides, resource information related to all sorts of things. So there's, household utility expenses, food programs, mental health, healthcare related expenses, disaster relief. So it's a number of things. That one I think is really important, and also one that people may not know about because it's not something that you really discuss at like an appointment. Hey, put this in, in your wallet in case you ever need it.
Right.
So that's one. And then also finding local support. And right now I'll say local and be flexible about that. Virtual is fine as well. finding, a community is so important. Finding other parents, for overall well-being allows us to cultivate a real connection with people. And I will say, for many things that kind of irritate me about social media, the one really strong positive component of it is you can use it to really cultivate strong community and strong connections with other collaborators and find ways to get parents connected with other people. Scott is one of those people actually that you had on. He's great. He talks a lot about paternal mental health.
Right.
And we've collaborated with him recently. We're going to collaborate with him again soon, going over the whole invisible labor discussion, how supportive parents can help new and expectant parents get through the, division of that workload. And so I would say those are the three top: Postpartum Support International, 211, and then that virtual or in-person local support, because it's just, it's key to have other parents that you can kind of count on and not feel so isolated in a time that there is just such constant change that makes it difficult for parents to bond with one another. It's really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are 3 hallmarks of parental burnout, and there's different stages. So one is the overwhelming significant exhaustion related to one's parental role. And as I mentioned before, this can be more physical based on the age of the child, how much you're physically running around. And then older, maybe older kids, it could be a bit more emotional, navigating all the changes, school changes or just emotional changes that are occurring as children get older. There's also the emotional distancing from one's child or children. And then that third stage is a lack of joy or fulfilling pleasure, ineffectiveness in your parenting role. So it's a distinct change between the parent you were and the parent you see yourself as now. So those are kind of the 3 defining hallmarks of what parental burnout is.
Sure. And, I think it's also important to differentiate a little bit between how do you know if you're depressed or anxious, or if you're kind of just quote unquote just burnt out. Burnout is real, and it's its own thing for sure. But if you're having low mood and lack of motivation for more than 2 weeks, including some other things like difficulty concentrating and crying, or feeling really agitated and irritable, and those kinds of things are lasting for more than 2 weeks, it might be worthwhile to look in to see if this is like depression versus burnout. Typically, like a burnout can be helped by changing a couple of things, and having breaks and like having more sustainable lifestyle, I suppose I could say. But for those feelings that like feel intractable, or feels like it's always going to feel this way, it can be worthwhile to maybe at that point see a professional to just be sure.
Absolutely. And that's such an important point. One that I clarify with everybody is I am not a therapist. I think it is very important for people to, if this is what they're experiencing, to seek out professional help. I know that some people have found that it's been difficult to find, therapeutic services locally.
So hard right now. Yeah.
Yes, so hard. It's why Postpartum Support International becomes a very important resource to be able to get connected with somebody. And as you mentioned, there's layers to it. And so to be able to kind of dig into that and find out what you're truly feeling and where it comes from, you should seek out professional advice for it. I bring this up to define it and say, these are the things that people, could be looking out for. There is a bright side to talking about these things and to having these open discussions, which we're noticing now. And I applaud people for having it, because this is a difficult discussion to have.
For sure.
This is not easy to say, hey, I might need some additional help here, especially if you've been handling it all. So talking about it, sharing our feelings is so important. Finding a person or people group that you can share and have this discussion with on a professional level or otherwise. Really, really important. And reevaluating, as you mentioned, your stress. What are some things that you can do to take off your plate that are urgent versus not urgent? I talk about that. It's like the triage is so important here. What is considered actually absolutely urgent and what is non-urgent? And most things are not urgent. So let's take some of those things off of your immediate plate and do them later.
Like dishes.
Yes.
Right.
And that's, like putting away your laundry. I mean, I have a laundry basket upstairs that's staring at me. I haven't put it away.
Yep.
And that's okay. But being honest about this experience, I think is what we are seeing more and more lately is the honesty that's coming forward. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, we're seeing more parents sharing their experiences. We're seeing more parents collaborating and brainstorming on new ways to address this. And there's a lot of power in that, in this collective voice that's coming forward in changing this, and also making the small changes. Like, yes, you don't need to do those dishes right now. You can do something else for yourself for 15, 20 minutes or whatever amount of time that you need to do, and just make that time for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any kind of drops in the bucket that you can add in that help increase your own capacity, will help reduce this feeling of burnout and your overall just well-being.
Yes.
So I appreciate all of those points and reminding us that you can feel better.
Yes, you definitely can. You can feel better. You can go seek if there's additional help that you need, if there's a supportive ecosystem that you need to cultivate. These things can happen small and gradually. We don't have to do these things overnight to make a world of change. We can make small, gradual changes in what we're doing to be able to improve upon what has gone on. I mean, for some people, years or past 18 months that we're seeing this message amplified. And then the whole idea of I should be doing this. I should be doing that right now.
Yeah. We can throw those shoulds away.
Yes. Exactly.
We don't need all that pressure.
It's too much pressure, and man, parents are doing amazing things right now. And if there's one thing that I can say, because I don't want to end this, I don't want this to be a doom and gloom thing whatsoever. I want this to be, informative and helpful in whatever way it could be. But parents are doing so much right now. The capacity at which everybody is working is just unbelievable. To just have more self-compassion and saying, I'm doing the best that I can right now. And that is enough for what I can do. And I will, look to other people, and asking for help is not a sign of weakness whatsoever. It's a sign of strength to be able to delegate to other people. And I'm commending parents everywhere, because the workload is it's high, and parents are just awesome people.
Yes.
Awesome humans.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful note for us to wrap up on, because it's so true. And I hope that everyone can hear what you're saying and really feel that very deeply. And I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work and your passion with us, and giving the listeners some things to think about when it comes to parental burnout.
I appreciate you, Dr. Kat. Thanks so much for having me be on. It's a pleasure.
Thank you again, Shelley, for being with us. If you out there would like to be connected with her, you can go to runtellmom.com or Instagram at runtellmom. And if you know anybody who could use the support of this episode or this podcast, please do share so we can make sure everyone has the support they need. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us at momandmind.com.